behalf of the Muncie Urban Design Studio, I'd like to welcome you all to the first of two brown bag, as we're calling them, luncheon speeches. I might remind you that we certainly invite all of you to return tomorrow, same time, same place, same station, to hear Steve Carter, who will talk about River Design Dayton, a project dealing with some of the same issues that the charrette teams are dealing with here in Muncie. This noon speaker is returning to Muncie for an actual third time because he, 25 years ago, did execute a piece of sculpture on one of the bank buildings here in town. Sandy Schultz comes to us from St. Louis, from the firm of Scopia, and he, along with Bill Severson, have executed a number of sculptures worldwide, have been certainly published widely, and have in the last several years, in fact, executed major works. I'm going to let Sandy talk, but there was a recent article in the Christian Science Monitor, and I would just like to read a very brief part of a paragraph that Ted Wolfe wrote about Scopia's work, and a quote that Sandy had in the article. And as soon as I find it here, it says, "Nature has been my main source of inspiration. Capturing the images around me in the natural world and restructuring them as art is endlessly fascinating. There can be no substitute for the quality of mystery and magic found in nature." And I think we will certainly agree that Sandy's presentation, this luncheon, will have some of that quality and magic. So Sandy Schultz.
Thank you. A funny thing did not happen to me on the way to the charrette, or is that charade? No, it's really charrette. We're here in deadly earnestness. I myself and the other members of the team are all here in Muncie because we really believe in what you're all trying to do here, to revitalize the city. We're talking about the White River, but we're talking about Muncie as a macro-scale sculpture. We're talking about the importance of aesthetics in changing the world. I'm just an incurable optimist, a little Mary Sunshine, if you will, or Candide. And my home and my studio, I sort of live in sculpture. I believe in a holistic attitude. This is our studio where we actually create the sculpture and where we design the sculpture. This is a sunken garden done on many levels that we work with Richard Cummings, the architect and landscape architect. And it is a sort of a never land between sculpture and architecture and landscape architecture. Here's one picture of it done on many levels. And it sort of tells you a little bit about, my philosophy. This was about 10 years ago when we had the biggest flood that ever hit the Middle West, and our studio started seeping in the basement, and we called some environmentalists out, and they said the only way you could assure that it would never happen again was to create a couple of sump pumps and dig a big hole and actually come into the basement so you could open it up. And so that's what we did. We could have cried a little, but instead we went out and got a loan and created this as a piece of sculpture. And now it's one of the favorite spots at the studio, both for ourselves and for clients. Scopia is a Greek derivative to take visual aim. And that's what we're all about. It's the name of the studio, as Taliesin was the name of Frank Lloyd Wright's studio. Actually, it's two sculptors working together, William Severson and myself. We design many things together as a architectural team would. And we work with the process. It's the same process that we hope to work with while we're in Muncie. I mean, the whole team, I hope, that everyone's important and that there really isn't a star system. We're talking to you people in the community. We're talking to, you know, the professionals that are here, and especially the students, because we've come here mainly to learn from you. I'm going to be talking about linkage, connectors, connectedness today, because that's hopefully what we're going to be working on this week, is sort of the connectedness, the linkage between the river and the city. And this is a slide that I took at Padre Island when a storm was coming up, and it was very difficult to say this was the sky and this was the sand. They were trying to sort of imitate one another, but it gives you that holistic, connected, all one quality that I think is very important. Actually, I deal with metaphors, you know, and you'll see that in our work, I hope. But in this case, the sand really is the sky, and vice versa. This is the first time that I've showed this slide since I showed it to Burlington Industries. But I thought it illustrates a very important point, you know, about symbolism. We're going to be hopefully looking for content and context so that someday when we come back here, and Tony is talking about an 18-year program at least, and then we'll worry about the next 18 years after that, we're going to hope that we've come up with something very meaningful and something that has a content both for the people here in Muncie or Middletown and beyond. Many years ago, Arthur Odell, when he was asked us to design a smokestack, the smokestack by Burlington Industries in North Carolina was too close to the building, and the client did not want to spend the money to move it. Well, after they put it in, it would have cost $100,000, and after they put it in, they said, gee, it really smokes the building, and would have cost maybe $400,000 to move it. So Odell called us in, Louis Odell out of Charlotte, and said, why don't you design a smokestack that would really speak of Burlington? And we came up with this idea. It would have been 125 feet long, and it would have brought we went through the mills, and it would have really brought this connectedness idea. Well, Charlie Myers liked it very much, but it just at that time he stepped down as chairman of the board, and a new man came up, and he said it's so big, and you know, maybe people would think it was commercial. Well, he didn't do it, and I'm starting out by showing you, you know, one of our failures, but it has a happy ending because we really loved the idea and started playing with it and came up with this that we call intersperse. It was exhibited in a national sculpture show in Philadelphia, and Philip Berman and his wife saw it and liked it and gave it to the Morris Arboretum, and now the Morris Arboretum is becoming a sculptor's park, and this is the first piece of sculpture they had, and it's right near the park entrance, and it speaks of intersperse. It speaks of this interthreadedness that I'll be talking about today, the interconnectedness between man, plants, animals, and nature. And the reason I started out by saying that it's not a charade, but deadly serious, is that I think we all believe that if we don't feel that way, pretty soon there isn't going to be any man. You know, there's too many animals and plants that are being lost for eternity, which is a long time, every day. So this is what this talks about. Our best known sculpture, last week we just got 3 articles, one in Madrid, one in, one was in French, and I forget where the other one was published. But Arthur Odell, when he was head of the American Institute of Architects, called us in and asked us to design this, which was for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And originally, these people wanted a colonial building. And we're talking about getting clients involved, getting the city involved in a way that is very special to us and special to them. And in this process of discussing things with the clients first, And the idea came up here that they're really the connectors in the industry between the Blue Cross, Blue Shield, the medical profession, and the people. When one of the directors said, well, how do you know? People coming by won't know that these are connectors. We said, well, it's like the stele in Yucatan are anywhere in the world where they have these marvelous steles. You know that you're at the right place. You know that this has a sense of presence. And here you can see a sample of sculpture that is counterpunctal to the building. It works counterpoint like a piece of music does. And I show the picture on your right to show that it also has to work against the park. If it doesn't work by itself as a piece of sculpture, if it doesn't have all the things that good sculptors have always thought about, the idea of a monumental quality, of having exciting form, of shapes that you can see through and that changes any way you look at it. We like to think of these as a spatial thing and not a thing of space. If it doesn't have all of these things, well, then you might as well quit. But hopefully it has this metaphor, this magic. This won the Award of Excellence from the Florida chapter of AIA last year, and it was a trash transfer station done for Greenleaf Teleska. They're building a trash transfer station, compacting it, building hills and valleys and landscaping it. So we call this negative to positive. There were two groups in Atlanta wanting to call this, one the Martin Luther King Memorial, and one wanting to call it the Phoenix, a la Clark Gable and Rising from the Flames, Gone with the Windish. These are 46 feet tall, and rather than to wait to see which group won, we did this, which pleased the first group and Mrs. King. It's called Aspirations. It's 46 feet tall. It's done with a beaten bronze tipped hammer so that over the years it will become very, very rich, and you can't stay under it without looking up and seeing views of the city and knowing that it does indeed represent the theme of aspirations. Now, this I found up in Canada many years ago, and here's the sculpture we'll be working on this summer. It's 75 feet tall. It's created for Lindclay Corporation in Columbus, Ohio, and it will be a stele. It will be a marker. It will be a 100-foot pool, and the water will rush up here and will mist out of the top. It's a sculptural fountain. A wall that's 260 feet tall by 60 feet across. It's sort of my Mount Everest. Bill and I did it because it's there. And it faces the arch, gives a different context to the arch, and that is the context of the God-man touch, the perfect circle of God up above and the imperfect circle of man down below. It's carved into solid brick, and once the scaffolding was vertical, way up here, and someone was killed on an accident like that in East St. Louis across the river, and practically everybody left the job except the sculptors once the wind started hitting the scaffolding and hitting it against the building. But somehow we stuck with it, and that was sort of, this is the way they build buildings. Why not create a piece of sculpture out of it? So there it is. The grass was the line and space that Bill and I both react to. I guess our closest major work here is over 20 years old, and it's Concordia Senior College in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Glenn Paulson, who was a project architect with Siranen at the time, wrote us a letter a few years ago, and he said, that it stood up against the test of time. And that is something that we hope that what we come up with is going to do. And I'm talking about all of you, everybody here today. We're going to come up with something that hopefully won't be a circus or gaudy in any way, but would be something that we could all be proud of as having the sense of being done now, not copying arches or something that was done many years ago, or something being cutesy, or is it postmodern, or or is it good architecture? You know, the main thing is it good architecture? Is the river architecture or the berms architecture? Are they landscape architecture? Are they good planning? Something that we can be proud of for many, many years. Siranen personally picked this brick and had us carved through the entire wall. Now this is one of mine. About 10 years ago, I dove down in the British Virgins and picked up this shell, and this is a one of the elements that I did from that. This is one of my finest hours, I think. We work with many, many cities. You saw Miami and Atlanta being the first to get them to approve this building percent for art or money for art. This was Little Rock working with the legislature, and I think we're all here too because we're risk takers. You can't be in this business without being a risk taker. And in this case, I met an Italian, Mario Dell'Amico, who was born and raised in Carrara, Michelangelo's town, and knew where he could get some of Michelangelo's marble. Well, it was a chance in a lifetime. And we had, a good piece of sculpture needs a good professional. And the whole team, the engineers, the architects, the planners, but also a marvelous client. And the client in this case, besides being the state and the city, was the med school. And they said, think about what a small town medical school should have, and then do something else. They knew they didn't want microscopes and that sort of thing. So I took as the theme a relevance for life. That's north light coming in above this. And you can see this sense of things that many people would think of as weeds, for instance, Queen Anne Place. There are 5 of these panels, each one 25 by 8.5 feet. And I don't know whether any of you think about fate or whether somebody's watching you or not. I never really gave it much thought, but I know that I believe in getting to know people in a community. And I was here for months, and I would ask people to come and watch me work. I actually carved this in Carthage, Missouri. And the whole time I was there, some people would come in during the day, but only once did somebody come at night. And this man came in. He was about where that girl is at the door, and I was tired. I'd been carving all day and was working at night, and it was cold. And he came running toward me, screaming, and I really didn't know what was going on, and I still didn't when he actually came at me and pushed me down against some marble slabs. And finally, when I began to wonder what was going on, he said, take off your coat. And I had a fairly new jacket on, and it turned out that I was on fire. And I was getting warm at one of these things, and if he hadn't come right at that moment, I really don't know what would have happened. So after that, I said, I'm really going to invite people over and make it my business to get to know them. This is Beth Shalom. It's a synagogue in Kansas City. And it was about, 12 years old when the architect put all the money in, and the client then said, now what about the ark and the bema and so forth? He said, I knew I forgot something. And there just wasn't any budget. So they took the old ark and the old chairs and everything, and the people really were not happy with this. So they called us in. This was 2 years ago. And what we did, we repainted the ceiling so it became the ark in the desert, the ark in the wilderness. And we got a wall out of there and created a 34-foot mountain that has woven metal. So as you go up, you almost get a sense of moving. And then behind it, there's a stained glass window that I did. We cut the old ark down, which is way up here, and just saved the most beautiful part of it. And the same thing with the chairs. And it was a sort of a, it's what we're going to be doing in Muncie. Hopefully, we're not going to tear everything down or even recommend that, because old is beautiful, and there are some things worth saving. Now, this is the back of the screen and the window against it. And of course, we always use natural light and do all kinds of marvelous things with it. In this case, the light comes in and picks up that glass and creates rainbows all over the walls at certain times during the day. We've worked with 17 of Fortune's top 75 companies, and it's always amazing when a company, a multinational company like Ralston Freener will call in sculptors and say, okay, who are we? In this instance, the theme came about, we read everything about that had ever been published about Ralston. We had our biggest design contract to that date with them. We talked to people who had been there for years, people who just got there, and the theme evolved that they're really a protein utilizer and resourcer. Old man Danforth started the company by mixing protein in his garage and feeding it to the animals. He really was going to be an engineer or something else, and the thought of making a living like that sort of bored him. So he asked his dad, and his dad said, well, look, our farms are always going to have to be run by cows and horses, and you might as well feed them. Well, his father was wrong. He didn't think about the Industrial Revolution changing things, but it was a marvelous decision because of the cereal pet food industry. Well, anyway, they're still restructuring protein today, and I took this slide, these slides that you see of nature are mine, and put it in electron microscope. I talked about the city as a macro scale. In this case, we took a trip through an electron microscope and created a whole series of sculpture built on protein as seen through an electron microscope. This is a view looking directly into it, and it weighs a ton, and it has a sense of magic and mystery and mysticism of a big company. It floats above a black granite base, and you literally feel that it's floating. And when Hal Dean, the chairman of the board, said, how do you know it's a protein? We said, well, let us have the model back. And we took the model and we filled it with all kinds of things. And we presented that to him. He showed it to his microbiologist and his chemist and said, what is it? And they said, it's a protein. And he said, you've done your homework. And that's the thing that I hope we'll do here in Muncie, and that is we're going to do our homework. And I just get a great sense of people being here, excited, looking forward to this, caring, and caring about what's going to happen a year from now, 3 years from now. David's question I thought was so apropos, David Lewis this morning, when he asked, if indeed this is the most studied city in the country, then how come there's not a lot of studies about the river? And do we have to start from ground one? And is this just going to be another study washed down the stream, as it were? Hopefully not. Washington University asked me to enter their sculpture competition. Out of the last 100 years, they picked 5 sculptors, and they put this at the entrance to the exhibit, and the dean told me that they liked it so much that when they have their next alumni exhibit in 100 years, they're going to invite me back. I really believe in things that speak of nature. In this case, it's sort of reaching for the sun. It's called Sal Omnia Temperat from Karl Arf's Camina Burana, polished stainless. And you can see the natural forms that are the kind of things that inspire it. This is Mayan Spirit, Colorado Springs, Colorado, J.C. Penney's. This is a symbol for the Williams Company and the Bank of Oklahoma in Tulsa, Yamasaki Quarry, working with people in his office, and John Novak, who's now in Tulsa, who did the O'Hare Field. And you see yourself getting thin and thick as you walk by it because it's cast and polished stainless. Very simple, very elegant. Now, sculpture can be anywhere, and I have boxes of slides of cities, and this is a disc, and you can see what happens. You see it around you all the time. I saw some of them this morning when we were looking at the river. But if you get up close and forget the seat, forget the wheel, you really get a piece of music or poetry, rhythm, and so forth. Bill and I are extremely interested in energy, and we want other people to be aware of energy. And there's nothing like sculpture to make them turn their head away from the TV tube and say, okay, let's think about this particular idea, because there's some things that fascinate them. And especially young people. For instance, this is 24 feet tall. but it takes 24 gallons of water, 200 gallons of water a minute, about 10 foot high. And that's all the energy we take. Then its own momentum takes it up here, and then gravity pulls it down and shoots it over 60 feet away, and it bounces up and down. It's in Pensacola, and you can walk underneath it. Oops. Sorry about that. All right, let's try that again. This is another one of the sculptures that I did. Again, looking at nature as a catalyst for sculpture. This is ice around a dogwood, and I took the positive shapes of the dogwood and made them negative shapes and actually created a bronze sculpture from that. I'm going to spend a little time, as I've done already on the interspersed piece, to talk about the connectors again, the connectors of nature to art. And I'm especially fond of this. I'll be 55 in July. When I was 15, I created the etched glass for the Austin National Bank in Austin, Texas. I designed and did it, and the murals for the Tall Corn Hotel. And when I was 15 and 16, and used to go to these cities and do this, they used to call me Youthful Saunders Schultz. And nobody's done that until last December. This won first prize out of 65 sculptors from North and South America. And it's just north of Pensacola, Florida. And it's in a ambulatory home. You have to be ambulatory to live there. So I did what I want to do with the Muncie town people today. You know, I said, okay, you're ambulatory. That means you got to be ambulatory at something. Well, they love to collect shells. And I came home and collected shells there and did a whole series of drawings on shells. Couldn't get anything. I tried and tried. Couldn't get anything I really liked until I came up with the simple center shell of a nautilus. And I went back there. They invited me for the dedication, and I said, I want your stay here to be just like this nautilus. You know, it starts at the ground, but it keeps changing and growing and constantly searching. And I want that to be your whole stay here. And afterwards, they came over and hugged me and kissed me and said they couldn't believe that a youngster like myself could understand old people. So I felt very good about that. Now, you saw some you're looking at over 20 years of work that is created by Bill Severson and myself. And I've told you some of the things that I've done. I'll show you some of the things that he's done. But all the big things, you know, we did together. And you saw these great big towers. And then the other thing you saw is some lines in space that moved. Well, this photograph I found down in Mexico growing, and it introduces some lines in space. Bertoya's done them, but Orientals have done them for 2,000 years. And on the other side of the building, the Blue Cross Blue Shield building in Chapel Hill, these are 21 feet high and they actually vibrate. We had to get permission from the National Blue Cross Blue Shield because they said, well, nobody could deviate from their main Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And the way we got around that is we took a chance, and rather than sending them the model, we sent them an architectural drawing looking straight down. Well, when we did that, we put blue mirrors in. So only when you're looking straight down or straight up can you see that one's a Blue Cross and one's a Blue Shield. But at any other time, they're really fine sculpture. And you can see they work on 7.5-degree cycles, and they're moving and changing. Now, I'm talking about lines in space again. This is a design for the Blue Cross Blue Shield building in Denver, Colorado. George Hoover is the architect. And this would capture the sunlight 32 feet up and shoot it over 700 feet away. We call this our 700 feet sculpture. And I hope that when we're finished in Muncie, we'll call it our 7-mile sculpture, or at least 7 miles. It comes down and comes up as a gnomon. You sit here at 12 o'clock, at 1 o'clock, it's time to go in. And it goes through an almost 500-foot lobby. Each one of these is a collector, so that when the sun finally gets to the end, it will light up 19 feet at the end of that lobby. Now here you can see a spatial thing and not a thing in space. This is the Blue Cross Blue Shield building. I'm sorry, it's in Charlotte, and it's the North Carolina National Bank and the Radisson Hotel. Thank you. And because there's two companies getting together, and also a designer and Tom Vincilette and Arthur Odell were the architects. Howard Hirsch Bednar was the interior people. But we came up with another natural theme of symbiosis. No matter where you look at it, you get the sense of two companies or two entities working together. And of course, when you look up to it, it becomes a very positive symbol of a sunburst. These designers were so pleased that they had us do this about a year ago in the new Hyatt House in Columbus, Ohio. And again, we use light. It comes out from a lighted area into darkness, and then there's light over the pool. These are, and then into a darker area, and then into the light of the overhead aerial light, which is natural light coming down, and it's perfectly balanced. They're 20 foot long at the longest, the rods, but they're perfectly balanced on 20 foot on 80 foot airplane cables. Here's our latest of this type of sculpture. Again, we had a very creative client in Tampa Electric. They call themselves Tico. And unlike most utility companies who are scared to death to mention solar or wind or any other kind of free energy, because inherently I think they've got to know that it's the energy of the future. These people said, look, we've got a lot of coal, we owe a lot of coal mines, but eventually we're going to have to tell people that solar is important. And why don't we do it in some kind of a symbolic way? Well, this is 83 feet long, and they're connected to photovoltaic cells in the roof. When the sun goes over, they begin to move and dance, and if a cloud passes, they slow down, and if there isn't any sun, they stop, which is the way we're going to work. And it's just a very fun kind of thing. John Higginbotham, who works at McDonald, said, he wanted me to come over and stop a little motor, and I tried, and he said, well, maybe you're not using both hands. So I used both hands, and that motor kept going, and he said, if you hear the commercials by Mobil and Exxon, they're going to tell you that solar energy is 300 years away, but he said it's really not, and all we've got to do is turn our face to it instead of away from it, like we do the White River on this trip. Here's another sculpture for the Museum of Science Museum of Science in St. Louis that also turns with photovoltaic cells, also follows the sun. This was a fountain for a college. It since has been planted with green, and it's Sangamon University in Springfield, Illinois. And Mrs. Spaulding wanted a portrait of her husband, and we studied the man's life and found that he invented a water purification system using a 52.5-degree angle. We took his life's work and made a fountain out of it. He had heavier rocks, lighter rocks down to pebbles, and actually created a work out of this. Now we're still talking about lines in space, and this introduces one of my favorite of the nature-inspired sculpture. It's the new fountain that's going to be dedicated May 14th of this year on 12th and Walnut in downtown Kansas City. And these beautiful people took 4 big buildings down, and where there was old buildings that weren't savable, really, they put grass and trees back, and the old Boley building across the street, which is historic value, they are going to save. And what this is a rain thicket. It's like a thicket of young trees in the forest that you come after a rain. And we said, look, if you care enough this is the city of Fountains, Jackson County, and the city of Kansas City. If you really care enough to want to make this an important statement, let's find out, why is it important to you to tear down these older buildings and put up a natural farm? And so we went around the city, and we found that maybe a couple of miles away from their stadium, there's a park. And in this park, you can actually see the wagon wheel ruts of our ancestors. And it was right there that they had to make that momentous decision. The intellectual, deep-thinking pioneers went to Seattle and Washington, and the crazies ended up in Southern California. And what we said is that they're at also a point in their career where they have to make that decision, and they chose to make a statement that's symbolic of the importance of the forest. Now, as you see it, these lines, sometimes they go this way, sometimes they look straight, but they do all kinds of things with water. They spray, drip, mist, and again, we wanted to use science. So we took the same scientific theory that caused the Tacoma-Washington Bridge to fall. That is, when wind hits something this way, there's going to be a vortex around it. All you engineers know that. And causing it to go this way, so that whichever way the wind's blowing, there'll be different so-called branches moving, changing the display of the water, so it sort of enters into it. And these are construction shots, but you can see when the wind is down and the sun is behind your back, there's a rainbow that goes all the way through it, which to me is a pretty great symbol of hope. Oh, no. Can somebody stop? I just don't know. Oh no. I want to keep going the way I was going. What is wrong? Okay, now let's try it again. I'm sorry. Okay, this one, first prize out of 25 invited sculptors for a symbol for the University of Wisconsin at Green Bay. And it'll be about 40 feet long and 32 feet high or so, 33 feet. And there'll be water in here. You'll be able to climb through this and look up and see water. And it talks about the same things that you're concerned about here in Muncie, the reason that the city and the urban design studio has both names. You know, they want to get the city involved, and the city want to get the university involved. So we call this, you know, it's an interconnectedness, and it's the sort of reaching one for the other. Oh no! Can somebody do that by hand for me? I just. Let's go back to this one. No, you're going the other way. Can you just find it? Yeah. You can see I'm just not much for this technological world. Psychiatrists tell us that, you know, we just can't do what I've done over the years. You know, I've got a Yarkie at home and a Dracaena. And they tell me that's not enough. You can't turn your back like we have here to the river. You've got to face the environment. And back to where you have this one. Maybe I should try it from there. Why don't I work that one, and I'll go like this, and you know when I want that one turned, okay?
Sure, here's the wrong person. That's it up. pretty fabulous stuff.
Okay. Now, go ahead. Don. The one on the left is based on science. It's the New World Headquarters that Costello created for R.J. Reynolds, and it's based on mitochondria. And what I love about that is that it speaks of the interconnectedness of science and people and working together. But there's a little sign that says, "Please touch," and it moves and shimmies and shakes for quite a while. The one on the right is a waterfall to build a design for a bank in Appleton, Wisconsin. And you can't look at it and be under it without getting the sense of being a whitewater stream. Okay. Now this is one that I'm trusting you on. It's going to be 115 by 57 feet and weigh 8 tons and turn with a 6-mile-an-hour wind. It will be in the main park in Denver, and we spent 2 6-hour days trying to find a symbol. It's in front of the Science Museum, and it's the way people drove. It's a piece of wood that we found up on Mount Evans, and the fountain is not built yet. I mean, the pool and the plinth that turns it are built to our specifications, but not the sculpture. Shard Hills, New Jersey is the Taubman Company and Prudential and Beal, and they asked for a theme that would talk about high fashion, and we said this is high fashion, and when they said how, I said the title is called cleavage. Now this was just installed a couple of weeks ago, and we don't have slides of it, but there is a picture of it on the front page of the paper there, and it's for R.J. Reynolds in a plaza downtown Winston-Salem. Now I showed you some pictures of sculpture that were really counterpunctual to the building. This is really integral. You cannot look at that 37-story building without saying that the sculpture was designed for cost of synergism, and there it is at the dedication. And the marvelous thing that happens here is what happens when people are involved. This is Wayne Swisher, who's been with us for 20 years, who actually helped build this. And there you can see the chairman of the board and the photographer, and now you see it, now you don't, the kind of sculpture. All right. Let me have this. Here's one we're working on. If you come to the studio today, it's in Columbus, Ohio, and it's again, we're talking about the natural world, and it's a noon marker. It will not tell the time of the day. It'll tell noon, the solstice, the equinox, every month, but it will just refuse to tell the time of day. Now this is a symbol for a piece of sculpture in the park in St. Louis, and I wasn't going to show any more in the other tray, but I promised David I would show you this if I can get it. It's a symbol of the children design, where we actually asked the children to get involved. There it is. reason I wanted you to see this, and I really appreciate your patience, is that it's a very old piece for the St. Louis Zoo, but it's called, what it is participatory art. Chris Hagelin died overnight of a brain tumor, and he was about 12 years old, and we went to all his friends and classmates, and each one of them created a piece of sculpture that they might find at the zoo, an animal, a butterfly, whatever, bird, and we put it together as the Oriental ball within the ball within the ball, and gave each child his particular piece of sculpture back. So we used their artwork as tesserae, and it just became something that you would want to come back and show your grandchildren. You know, I worked on something important, and it's an idea that I wanted to show you that might be apropos here someday. This is St. Louis County, and it's a ginkgo leaf. This woman, his husband spent the last 2 years of his life raising money for a park at about 125 feet over the Mississippi River. And it's another environmental statement. It says, look, if there's an exciting river and a diversity of leaves, why not take and make a statement like that? And the strong statement is, it's kind of fun to have one abstract leaf done in bronze by man, but please, not all of them. Now, some of these, those were models, but I have a tray of underwater slides. I don't have an underwater camera, and what I did was just stand on the coral and look down and snap. This is the kind of thing that, you know, the people will do if left alone. I have many of these, and when I was carving in Carthage, they had, you know, a miner, and going all the way from that area, you know, to the Sublime. This is the Wainwright tomb that Louis Sullivan did in St. Louis, and this is the one thing that most designers want to see besides the Wainwright building. They were actually creating sort of Greek tombs with great big names on it, and he said, now look, your name's not going to be on it, but everybody will know that it's yours, and it's a perfect blend, a perfect marriage of art and architecture. Again, the stele in the desert. This was Yucatan, and it says, this is the place. Now, I just have a few of these left, but I found this in Colorado, and it's, you know, some very imaginative farmer that was trying to create his own sculptural image. Or this sculptural sort of image that I found up on a glacier in Canada. This was 2,000 years old in Yucatan, and look what they used for symbols. Leaves, you know. They knew they were important. This was created by the wind up in Canada. For all you architects, you know, I challenge you to come up with something more sculptural or architectural than that, which is a stadium done by nature in Padre Island. This is Muncie. I borrowed a camera the last time I was here and ran around behind the bank and just took that picture. Again, we're trying to sum it all up. We're trying to talk about linkage, about connectedness, about something that would have a pervasive sense of presence, something that the ancients did. Again, the symbol of the rainbow. For all you graphics people, you know this. You couldn't ask for a more dramatic movement than that. You know, this is the way we want to go. There it is, up, up, and away. And again, I can't tell you how important that, you know, besides us going to the river and getting our inspiration, just like the old masters did, from nature, we want to look at nature. It can't just be, you know, the face in the sand. This is the natural face. You see Abraham Lincoln in the sand, but the theme that I really wanted to leave you with was this. It's an American Indian hand that I found. And when I was in Yucatan, I saw that the natives would actually take their hands and paint them with dyes and then cover them up. And maybe 1,000 years later, when that would come down, you would see that their hand was there. And they said, okay, you know, it made a human statement. I was there, and we're here. We're here today, and what are we going to do with it? And the key, I think, says we've got to get back to the water. We've got to get back to nature, because that's our macro scale. It starts there, it moves out into the city. We've got to think of all these other things, the things that are important to all you planners. But we got to think of the water. This is my wife, Joan Schultz. Took that of the reflections of the magic of the sunlight on the bank, and there's a white river. You know, that's where we've got to start, and that's the key. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandy, and we have to apologize for the equipment that Ball State owns. As you know, we are designated now a work time for the teams to get together. We will meet again at 4:30 at the studio and start shuttling back to the Kitzelman Center so we can get ready for the dinner this evening. Thank you, other members of the Muncie community who are here tomorrow. Steve Carter will be here speaking and showing a slide presentation on how Dayton has revitalized and how they have used the riverfront in Dayton to become something that brings some life to their downtown. So thank you for attending, and we'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow.